So last time we were talking about Amos, the prophet Amos. We talked about three Isaiahs, with our principal study being Isaiah of Jerusalem, sometimes called First Isaiah or Proto-Isaiah. And as far as Second Isaiah, which is chapters 40 through 55, then we'll cover him at the appropriate chronological time. We're trying to stay with the timeline on this. We talked about Hosea, and we did not get to Micah. So, has everyone seen the video for last week so far? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so I don't need to catch up on anything. Okay, Micah. So the book of Micah is said to have recorded the sayings of Micah. That seems like it should be a no-brainer, but it's really not. Some of them that are attributed to the prophet aren't really attributed to the prophet himself, but is like a collection of his sayings and things like that. And we have actually very few prophets who did the writing themselves. Many times it was recorded by scribes or by historians, or sometimes, in the case of Jeremiah, he had a secretary, Baruch, who recorded everything, and then added his own touches to it. But Baruch will be somebody we spend a good bit of time on. Okay, so the book of Micah is... Do you need help? Do you need one?
No.
Okay.
No, I wasn't sure what.
It looks like...
Page 5.
Page 5.
Back here from my food.
Tell you what, in the meantime.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I'm not finding it. Okay.
Okay, so page 5 on that is what Micah is. His name was Mikiyahu, which actually means who is like Yahweh. Now, don't know if you ever remember, but we have another name like that, Michael, whose name means who is like God, who is like El, God. So he is from the 8th century BC, and he was from the village of Moresheth in Judah. So the way the book looks, the general outline there is, let me see. Yeah, all right, we're good. Is that there's 3 major divisions of the book. There's chapters 1 and 2, chapters 3 through 5, and chapters 6 and 7. And each one of those sections is introduced with the word here. So it's like the beginning of a new oracle or the beginning of a new section of the prophecy. And it goes between alternating declarations of doom and promise, and doom and promise. And there are these great expressions of hope inside each one of those 3 sections. Micah, he criticizes, condemns, reproaches, whatever words you like, the current leaders of the time, and unjust leaders, he calls them. He defends the rights of the poor against the rich and the powerful, while he keeps looking forward to a world at peace, a peace that is centered on Zion under the leadership of a new Davidic king. Now remember, in his time, there's still the Davidic monarchy is there, but the kingdom has been split, and now, by his time, we're even looking at the destruction of the north kingdom of Israel. It's been wiped out by the Assyrians. So, while the book is relatively short, 7 chapters, there we see laments there in chapter 1 and in chapter 7. We see a theophany in chapter 1, verses 3 through 4. A theophany, fancy word, that means an appearance of God. Think of Jacob there at Bethel, where he sees this appearance of God, or the angels going up and down. There, the burning bush is a theophany. That's an appearance of God there. So we have that, and then we have what we call a covenant lawsuit, and that's in chapter 8. And this is a pretty distinct class of material where God more or less sues Israel for a breach of contract, the Mosaic contract that God made with Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, you know what, you didn't keep your end of the covenant, this is a lawsuit to end that. It's a great symbolic and metaphorical passage, God wanting to end the covenant. Now remember, Amos kind of shows God undoing the covenant because he says, I will pass through the midst of you. Well, remember at the covenant with Abraham, there was a bull that was cut open, and it says that God passed through, and Abraham passed through. Well, that was a symbol of initiating the covenant. But now, in Amos, God tells the people of the north kingdom of Israel that you are the sacrificial animal, and I will pass through the midst of you, undoing the covenant. We'll actually see a good bit of that kind of language as we go on into the others, like Nahum and Zephaniah and some of the others. So, it's the chapter 1, in verse 1, what we call the superscription, the thing that should appear at the top, is it identifies Micah of Moresheth, which is a town in the southern part of Judah. And it says that he lived there during the reigns of Jotham and Ahaz and Hezekiah, those three kings. We're talking about probably 750 to 700 BCE. Now, this is the period during which, after a long period of peace, Israel and Judah and others of the nations of the regions, Aram with its capital in Damascus, and others, that they were really under pressure from Assyria, who is getting more and more aggressive. Now, Assyria had kind of taken over the vacuum. If we look at like where Nineveh is, well, that's one of the capitals. They had a capital at Asher, which was a little bit farther down the Tigris River, but so they're starting over here, and they've been kind of at odds with the old Babylonians. There'll be another bunch of Babylonians who come around, but the Assyrians now begin spreading westward, because this way there's the rough mountains of the Hindu Kush, there's what today we would call Persia, there's all that. They're wanting to go this way, because from here, wrapped around here, was a very fertile land. That's where all the great farmland was. Remember what we call that?
Fertile Crescent.
The Fertile Crescent. Yeah, that's exactly right. An old junior high term that still is applicable. So, in fact, Abraham had left down around this area where Ur and Sumer and Uruk were, the Sumerian cities, and had gone up north to Haran, up there, and began to take on the culture of those folks. Then migrated on south. Well, pardon me. So during this time, we have the Assyrians becoming more and more aggressive, and like I said, all the others around there really get it first, because Israel is going to be kind of the last one against the sea, unless you're talking about up there around Iran. At one point, I think it was Tiglath-Pileser III who really created the Assyrian Empire, that on one of these war tablets, it says that they pushed to the west until they washed their spears in the sea. Wow, that's great poetry, but it's also a little bit frightening too, that, yeah, what are they having to wash their spears for? Well, they're covered in blood, for crying out loud. So they make their way there. They will actually go back to Nineveh, because every year these guys were doing like annual campaigns, annual military campaigns. They'll come and they'll conquer the Arameans, go back home, feast, spend the winter, then come back again until eventually they start tagging everybody down the line. Between 734 and 727, this guy, Tiglath-Pileser III, spent the whole time simply conquering. He wound up taking almost all of Palestine. In 722, he conquered the north kingdom of Israel, but then it's not too long after that when he actually defeats the south kingdom. But instead of like conquering them, he simply made them pay tribute. Now that's kind of a trick that the Romans will use later, is tell you what, we'll leave you in power, we'll leave you a king or a queen, a pharaoh in Egypt, but you're going to pay us. You're going to pay us a whole lot of wheat, you're going to pay us a whole lot of gold and silver, and yeah, the tribute was what really they were looking for, because that's what's going to pay for the military campaigns. And Israel was not apparently as rich as the south kingdom of Judah. So you want to keep the south kingdom intact, let them keep doing all their agricultural stuff and their mining stuff, and Assyria will reap the benefits of it. So they were receiving the tribute from Ammon and from Moab and from Edom, all like down this way. They absolutely absorbed the Aramean kingdom, Damascus, absorbed it as part of their empire. Now Aram doesn't, exist as a political entity after them. And as soon as he passes away, well, the North Kingdom decides to rebel. And oh my gosh, what a bad night that was. So in 722, 721, this is when the Assyrians come back and they destroy the North Kingdom's capital in Samaria, and they laid siege to the city for 3 years. And then finally, they, in Micah chapter 1, verse 2 through verse 7, he's talking about that event. He's talking about how Samaria has been destroyed by God because of its crimes of idolatry. Well, we know that the kingdom of Samaria, the North Kingdom, they had brought in, well, here's a famous name. One of the princesses who married the crown prince, Ahab, was named Jezebel. And she brings in all her Phoenician gods, and especially the one that she worshipped particularly, who was Baal Melkart, the Lord of the Dead. Wow. So they kind of treat the, you Yahweh worshipers are a bunch of country bumpkins. You really don't know how to be cosmopolitan like us. So the people then start going towards it. And so this was in the court. So Micah and others like him are like, you guys are in trouble. You've departed the ways of God, the ways of Yahweh, and you're going to pay for it. So they saw the Assyrians as being something from the hand of God. We do that all the time. I was just watching the movie, and I'm not recommending it. I was just watching the movie last night. Nicole had gone to bed, and I was like, well, let me see something creepy. So I decided to watch this movie called The Black Death. Well, it's got Sean Bean in it, who was Aragorn. Boromir in The Lord of the Rings. He was Captain Sharp in the series called Sharp's Rifles. I've always liked this guy. And it also had Eddie Redmayne, who played Stephen Hawking in the movie The Theory of Everything. Okay, so, and I'm like, hey, I love these guys. Well, once I start, it's kind of hard for me to quit, but good grief. The thing is, the Black Plague comes, and of course I'm talking to the TV the whole time. I'm like, oh yeah, you religious people do that all the time. And then, Nicole comes out, is everything okay? These people here, that's a TV, you realize that, right? Yeah, I know. So, it was like the Black Death is God's punishment. No, it was fleas on rats, jumping on people, passing along the Did God cause it? You got a different view of God than I do if you believe that way. Anytime something bad happens, the righteous will stand up and say, see, you guys have done this all wrong. Now, was it a powerful tool for Micah and the others to use? Absolutely. Because then the southern kingdom was like, well, we can't do that. We can't have them. Did that stop them? No. It's like when we get to Jeremiah, the people of Jerusalem said, Nebuchadnezzar can't take us. We have the temple. And Jeremiah was like, I don't care what you got. I don't care if you have the first culvers in your city. It will be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. He is called the destroyer of cities. It won't stop him. And then he gives this it's called the temple sermon, where he was like, it's not the temple that keeps you safe. It's the presence of God, and you think that is going to keep you safe. No. Well, so Micah is using this also to say that, look, here's what you get. Did Israel have it coming? Well, not like this, because the Assyrians are just monsters. I mean, and there will come a time when the world will have had enough. It always happens when people just say, enough is enough. We won't take it anymore. And even the meek and the lowly will rise up, as will happen with the Assyrians, and finally knock a bunch of them off too. When the Assyrians attacked Judah then in 701, they came along the Philistine coastline along the Mediterranean Sea there, and actually came through Micah's village of Moresheth, as well as another town called Lachish, which was Judah's second largest city at that point. And those all form the background to verses 8 through 16 of chapter 1. And when Micah warns the towns of the coming disasters, and in fact he kind of singles out Lachish, that second largest city, because of the corrupt practices that they have absorbed from both Judah and from Samaria, from the north kingdom. Then he talks about how the houses and the lands are going to be gobbled up, and how the wealthy have taken the opportunity to seize the lands and properties. The powerful have exploited the weak, and he says, look, this is the reason you've got it coming. It wasn't idolatry necessarily, it was the way you treat the poor. You have grabbed up lands, and now you've even tried to militarize the area, putting garrisons there and troops there. This is farmland. This is nice. These are nice people here, and now you're turning it into an armed camp because they know that the Assyrians are coming. Now, some, but not all, biblical scholars think that chapters 1 through 3 is the authentic Micah material, that it comes from his time. And the later Micah material comes from a period that is after the exile in Babylon, when the temple has been rebuilt in 515, so that the early 5th century seems to be the period for the writing of, or the compiling of the whole book. First 3 chapters are absolutely from the time of Micah that we talked about there, the 720s. The later seems to be talking more about the return to Jerusalem. The first stage of it was collecting and arranging the spoken sayings of the man we know as Micah. That's chapters 1 through 3, like I said. When Micah is attacking those who build estates in land that has been oppressed by the Assyrians, and he talks about the coming attack on Judah is also, God's will, and God's attack on corrupt rulers and stuff like that. And then he includes a prophecy that the temple is going to be destroyed. Now, we know that doesn't happen under the Assyrians, which is why we kind of say that some of this material comes from later, after the temple had indeed been destroyed in 586 BC. So that prophecy isn't fulfilled in Micah's time, but 100 years later or more, when Judah faced a similar crisis from the Babylonians. Technically the Neo-Babylonians, but never mind that. And so some of Micah's prophecies get reworked by a later editor and later scribes to reflect this new situation that's happening there. And apparently they don't have any problem with taking older texts and reshaping them to current situations. We'll talk when we get over to the next group. They're called emendations, where they will twist, alter, twist sounds, nasty. Sounds more like intentional harm, No, they kind of adapt them to fit their situations. And there will be certain phrases. Okay, like for example, in Acts chapter 6, verse 37, I think. If you look in the 1611 King James Version, we're just going to compare King James Version. The 1611 version, it's got chapter 37 in there, verse 37. But you look in the 1881 version, and all of a sudden, it's gone. Verse 37 is not there. It goes from 36 to 38, no 37. Why is that? Because the scholars of the time decided that was not in the original. And so they would simply lift it out. And there are so many things. I think I told you when we were talking about Job, that we know that famous phrase from Job when he says, "Though he slay me, yet will I praise him." And it's not in the original. It was actually something that was written in the margin by this holy rabbi, and the people all thought that too was a word from God. And so it winds up being inserted in there. Now, later texts will remove that, which is a little sad. I kind of like that phrase. That's okay. It's worth, or at least make it a footnote or a marginal note or something like that. So we'll see that'll happen a lot of times when things will get absolutely removed, or in the best case, at least put to a footnote or something like that. But anyway, so when we again looking at Micah, we can see three pretty broad groups. Or parts. There's the judgment against the nations and the leaders. There's the restoration of Zion, chapter 4 and 5, which again is probably coming from after the exile. And then there's God's lawsuit against Israel. And then this great expectation, this great hope in chapters 6 and 7. So within that three-part structure, we see oracles of judgment, oracles of restoration, oracles of judgment, restoration, judgment, restoration. It's this back and forth, which is a thing that the Hebrews did a lot. There were times when they would have these curse and blessings, and at one point, half of the tribes would be on one ridge, there was a valley, and then the other half of the tribes would be on the other ridge, and one group would say, "Blessed are you if you do this." And then the others would respond, "But cursed are you if you do this." And it was kind of, imagine being the one in the valley, hearing this echoing back and forth like that. But that's a typical Hebrew thing to do. And it's remarkable, it's marvelous to watch the, blessings, but you're going to get it. But then everything will be okay. But then you're going to get it. But then everything will be okay. Let's see. All right, so I think we can leave Micah there. In the end, Micah talks about the future of Judah and Israel, after the Babylonian exile, and just like Isaiah, there is this vision of the punishment of Israel, and then a creation of the remnant, of those who are left behind. And that'll be followed by a period of global peace, again, centered on Zion, under the leadership of a new Davidic monarch. Now, by the time that stuff is being written, the Davidic monarchy is gone. They are dead. The last king in exile has died in exile, and when the people return back, there is no king in Jerusalem. They are headed, or I should say administered, by one of the Persian satraps, which is like a governor. And they won't have anybody there for it. And then you'll have the Greeks with Alexander the Great coming down. And then you'll finally have a rebellion called the Maccabean Revolt, where they'll try to throw off, their Greek overlords. And then comes the Romans, and everything changes then. Whereas Isaiah sees Jacob, that is Israel, joining the nation under Yahweh's rule, Micah is looking forward to Israel ruling over all the nations. Not really what was some of the early prophets, or the prophets before him, like Hosea and certainly Amos, who were saying you were supposed to be priests. You're not supposed to be kings, you're supposed to be priests. Micah is seeing this in a different way now, where Israel will rule the bunch of them. So he kind of provides a counterpoint to some of the other saints, especially Isaiah. Okay, so now we'll go on to the next group. From the 600s. The first one is, you can say however you want to, Nahum, Nahum, anyway, we'll go Nahum. We don't know too much about his personal history, but we know that his name means comforter. Well, that's nice. And he was from the town of Elkosh, or sometimes you'll find it on old text as Alkosh. That is in Nahum chapter 1. Later on, that city becomes known as Capernaum. All right, we know about that from Jesus' time. He was very nationalistic, but he says that he lives among the Elkoshites in peace. His writings are probably around 615. Now, you'll notice there's about a 100-year jump from the last one, Micah, that we talked about, somewhere around 720. And now, here we are with Nahum, 615, 100 years later. It is just before the downfall of Assyria. In Nahum, the book, we have two parts. There's a prelude to the whole action that we see in chapter 1, and then chapters 2 and 3, which describe the fall of Nineveh. So while he was living there in 615, he was alive to see the destruction of Nineveh, or at least hear reports about it. That took place in 612 BC. He describes Nineveh to Thebes, which is down here in Egypt. Nineveh and Thebes, he compares them with each other. The Thebes had been destroyed by the Assyrians in the year 663, in that period in between we were talking about. And Nahum talks about the siege and the frenzied sack of the city that he knows about, as Nineveh's troops try in vain to hold off the Assyrians. No stopping it. And actually, Nahum kind of makes himself a participant in the battle. Was he there? No. But he is being poetic at this point. And a little bit of irony, and he yells out. It's an incredible book. He yells out orders to the defenders: guard that wall, shut that gate. All this stuff, he's ordering them to do it. Now, he already knows the end of the story, but it's like watching a movie you've seen 100 times, you know, watching The Godfather and go, Sonny, don't get in the car, don't go to the toll booth, don't, they're gonna, he doesn't listen. You know, so he is doing the same thing. He's participating in history this way. I love a guy who looks at history and still sees himself as an active participant in it and tries to alter it. I, to this day, sometimes Nicole will wake me up and she'll like, what were you dreaming about? I'm like, why? And so she goes, because you kept saying, they're not French. I'm like, yeah, I was at the Battle of Waterloo and I was trying to tell Napoleon, those aren't French troops coming, they're Germans. And so she goes, does it ever work? No, not yet. I'd like to have that dream, but anyway. Nahum uses lots of these kind of metaphors and descriptions that Nineveh is going to be a lot like what happened with the city of Thebes. He'll say phrases like the lion hiding in his den. Great poetic stuff that he uses there. And he finishes with this song, kind of a funeral dirge, but there's a bit of a taunt to it. It's kind of like, you're going to get, you guys did this to Thebes, you can't imagine what's going to happen to you. Now, is he speaking as an oracle of God? Well, he thinks he is, and that's fine. But he's also a keen observer. He knows what happens to kingdoms like this. He knows what happened to the Arameans and the fall of Damascus. He knows what happens to the oppressive Egyptians. He knows that it's going to happen to the Assyrians too. He talks about the sleep that will come on the Assyrian people. Well, the big sleep, as Humphrey Bogart called it. The death of the Assyrian people. And the once great, magnificent empire of the Assyrians is going to be reduced to rubble. The poet, who is it? Shelley? Or Shelley, I think, wrote the poem Ozymandias, and it talked about this great figure who is now, his statue is face down in the dust, covered by the sands of time. Now, he was talking about the Assyrians. This great empire that left nothing. I mean, there was just really nothing to talk about from the Assyrians. We know that there was those, the winged bulls. That's about all we know of Assyrian sculpture, is that because the destruction of the cities was just so complete that hardly anything was left standing. So, now, sorry?
Who did that to you?
Oh, we'll get to them in a minute. Yeah. It's one of the coolest stories. Yeah. You asked, so we'll jump ahead to it. The Assyrians had just humiliated everybody. It's not just a matter of conquest. It was humiliation. When armies would go out to meet them, they would actually cut off body parts and put them on like trinkets hanging from carts, and then have a bull or whatever drag the cart into the city, and people would say, holy cow, that's Uncle Chuck. That's, or whoever. It was a humiliating thing. So people thought, well, then maybe we should just surrender. Oh, that's no good either. They'll kill you. And like in the case of the North Kingdom in Israel, they simply took them all and moved them to a far part of the empire where they were never heard from again. That's what's known as the diaspora. People talk about the scattering of the Jews. They're not talking about what happened with the Romans in the 2nd century. They're talking about what happened under the Assyrians. And then the Assyrians would bring other people from far parts of the empire and then bring them to Israel, to the North Kingdom. And that's where we get the Samaritans. These were people who had once lived someplace else, but they came now to live in the North Kingdom, and they try to absorb the culture. They even become worshipers of Yahweh. But That's not their homeland, and they are not, how should I say, by DNA linked with those from Judea, which is why the Judeans in Jesus' time looked at them as foreigners. In fact, they even called them, names that didn't just mean from a different land. It meant you're not allowed into the temple, which is why when Jesus talks about the Samaritan leper who came back, or the Samaritan woman who said, we've been expecting a Messiah, he talks to them with such fondness because, hey, look, you're accounted as a foreigner, and yet you have more faith than those who are allowed into the temple. Well, so what happens is after all this, there was a guy named Cyaxares. He was the king of the Medes, and the Medes are a little bit north of Babylon, around up there. He had been met by the Assyrians, and the Assyrian king, I think it was Nabopolassar, invited him to come to a banquet. And he says, so, how did you enjoy this? Oh, thank you. Thank you for, including me here. Did you like the meat? Yeah, the meat was good. Yeah, you should. It was your son. Yeah. Now, that tells you everything you need to know about the Assyrians. But it also tells you that Cyaxares, who was just one of these cool cats, was like, what would you have of me? What are you trying to prove of me? Well, all right. But Cyaxares winds up hooking up with these guys a little bit farther south, the Babylonians, and he was like, we need to kill all of them. And the Babylonians were like, we're in. So it was this coalition of the Medes and the Babylonians. There were Persians involved, because they had had enough. And they launched an attack on the Assyrians. Well, in 612, like I told you, the city of Nineveh, one of their capitals, was annihilated, just destroyed. But the Assyrians keep retreating back because it's almost like, when the Soviets were retreating in World War II and drawing the Germans into the Russian territory, they are kind of withdrawing them in there. Now, at the same time, a pharaoh from Egypt, Pharaoh Necho, Necho, the second, decides he's going to come up and he's going to help him out. He figures, these Assyrians are bad dudes, but if I can come to their aid, well then how cool is that going to be? Over in Israel, or Judah, good King Josiah decides, I got to stop him. And everybody's like, dumb, you can't stop the Egyptians. If I can just slow them down long enough, he says, and keep them from linking up with the Assyrians, then the Medes and the Babylonians and the Persians can finish off the Assyrians. And so he goes to battle at this place called Megiddo. And it was the cataclysmic battle for the kingdom of Judah. Well, Josiah is killed in the battle. And again, we'll talk about different views of history. Kings, for example, the book of the Kings will say, Josiah, what a good guy. Went off to do this and fell in battle against them. And then Chronicles, who is not so friendly to the South Kingdom, says, shouldn't have done it. The Lord told him not to do it. The Lord said it was a bad idea. The Lord never said nothing. Anyway, so you have different accounts of this tale based on who likes the South Kingdom and who hates it. So he's defeated, and by the time Necho gets anywhere close, almost up into Asia Minor, or Turkey, what we would call, at the Battle of Carchemish in 605, the coalition finishes off the Assyrians. I mean, they're done. It's not like, the Babylonians come and go, the Persians come and go, the, Egyptians come and go, Judah come and go, but the Assyrians are done. They are exit stage right from the stage of human history. They are done. Are there still people who can call themselves Assyrians? Yeah, absolutely. absolutely. But I mean, as a world power or even as a political power, the Assyrians are out of it after 605. So, that's what is going to happen. So, we can look at the book of Nahum. Is it prophecy or is it history? Because he's certainly viewing these things that happen. One account says that this is written probably about 615, and it is a prophecy just before the downfall of Nineveh and the fall in Carchemish, while another account says that no, this looks like history. It looks like he has witnessed these things, and his description is pretty good. So it is called a book of vision. It is, since we know for a fact that it's dated after the fall of Thebes, that happened in 663, we can say that we can make a pretty good guess that it is at least 615, but probably no later than 605. His theme, or his context, is that the complete and final destruction of Nineveh, that great Assyrian capital, is imminent. Ashurbanipal was the king who was at the height of his glory. Nineveh was just this vast city, and it was the center of his civilization. In fact, we talk about the 7 wonders of the ancient world. You remember one, there was called the Hanging Gardens. Do you remember where that was located? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. There is no archaeological evidence in Babylon that shows there was ever any hanging gardens there. All kinds of great stories about it. But we find out that there were historians of the time who were referring to Nineveh as Babylon, as kind of a new Babylon. And they've done excavations there, and they found, yep, it looks like there was this kind of a hanging gardens. It was actually in Nineveh. Like Rome is referred to as Babylon in the book of Revelation, in the same way, some of these ancient writers were referring to Nineveh as this new Babylon. That's where the Hanging Gardens apparently were. Well, anyway, so it's this city of great glory, but Nahum refers to it as a bloody city full of lies and robbery. Well, coming shortly after Nahum is going to be Zephaniah, who is also going to destroy it. Well, anyway, or who's also going to prophesy about it. Nineveh was destroyed by fire, 612. The Assyrian Empire came to an end finally after Carchemish, and it literally changes the face of southwestern Asia. They find all kinds of great archaeological stuff, ruins, and really kind of foundations of ruins, under Sennacherib, who had ruled from 705 to 681 BC. There was Esarhaddon, his grandson, who ruled from 681 to 669. Then there was Ashurbanipal, who was the one who had destroyed the city of Thebes, who rules from 669 to 633. Sorry. There were huge walls, and of course, if you've ticked off the whole world around you, the first thing you need is good walls. And so the walls were actually like 8 miles around in circumference around the city, which is pretty massive. There was a water aqueduct. No, the Romans were not the first to do that. We're not sure the Assyrians were either, but we know the Assyrians had one. There was palaces, there was libraries there. They found in the library, man, I would have given almost anything to be one of those archaeologists who finds the library, 20,000 volumes, and what they find there, and it'll take a while for them to translate it, but they find the Enuma Elish, which was the Babylonian and Akkadian creation story, But they also found the Assyrian tablets of, nice catch. I hope we got that on camera.
I know.
Rewind and go back and look and see that it was Linda. And also they found the first tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Maybe my favorite epic from the ancient world. In that Epic of Gilgamesh, we find a flood story. We find, it's just magnificent. There's a great translation or paraphrase of it now by a guy named Stephen Mitchell. It is the most readable version of it ever. You don't have to know Akkadian or any of those, or Sumerian. Yeah, he tells it in a very poetic way. Yeah, if you're ever into that kind of stuff, it's worth reading. Well, the Babylonian Chronicle of the fall of Nineveh tells our best story about the end of Nineveh. After all, the Babylonians were part of the gang who knocked them off. Nabopolassar of Babylon, like I said, had joined forces with Cyaxares the Mede, and they laid siege to the city for 3 months. The thing is that in the siege of the city, people don't die from weapons. They die from hunger, they die from dysentery, because how are you going to dispose of the waste? And so, yeah, plague is usually what gets them. So anyway, 3 months and they're done. So Assyria had lasted a few more years after that, like I said, up to 605. And even though Necho had tried to rally the Assyrians, thanks to King Josiah, it was all over with by 609, 605. Okay, so Zephaniah, how are we doing?
We're doing just fine.
Zephaniah. He is during the reign of good King Josiah that we just talked about, from 649 to 609 BC. Zephaniah, the name means Yahweh has hidden or protected, or sometimes Yahweh hides. The book, the book itself in chapter 1, what we call the chapter 1, verse 1, the superscription, says that the author was Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, in the days of King Josiah, son of Ammon of Judah. And that's everything we know about Zephaniah. Don't know any more about him than that, really, except the name Cushi from Zephaniah's father. It means Ethiopian or Cushite, because Ethiopia was known as Cush, right? So, all right, his father then is apparently a Cushite, because the text actually talks about the sin and the restoration of Cushim, where he had been from. So some have concluded that Zephaniah was maybe dark-skinned or African descent, and the Rabbi Ehud Ben Zvi says that based on the context, Cushi is probably a description more than it is a name, a real name. So he is talking about his father's nationality. And then others have said that Hezekiah, there's a name that we might recognize, but Hezekiah, is it really the king King Hezekiah of Judah? But probably not. It is probably someone else who had been, part of the court maybe, because Zephaniah is by all evidence an educated person. Anyway, so the same way with so many of the prophets of the time, there's no external evidence that we can directly associate the writing of this book with any prophet by the name of Zephaniah, just because we can't find records of him except for this book. And that's okay for me. But some scholars say that the words of Zephaniah, they reflect a time early in the reign of King Josiah, who again ruled from 640 to 609. And it was probably before the reforms. All right, we'll have to put a pause here. In 622 BC, Josiah, the story tells us, that they were cleaning out the temple that was there. And they went into a place in one of the back rooms, and they were cleaning it all up, and they found a scroll. And it was the scroll of Deuteronomy, according to the story. And so it's brought out to Josiah, the high priest, and Josiah pour over the scroll. They realize what they found. And Josiah says, we have departed from the ways of the Lord. We've got shrine sites out there. We got all this other stuff going on when the worship is supposed to be in the temple. Ironically, there is no mention of the temple in Deuteronomy because it had not been built yet and would not be built yet for another 200 years. Okay, so he now starts what becomes known as the Josiah Reforms. And everybody loved it. The prophets loved it. The priests, not so much, because it kind of ruined some of their income. But they all said, we have now found the words of the Lord. Now we've done. Well, that's something that was apparently inserted sometime later. Here's one of the most troubling things. It's really not part of the class, but yeah, it is because it's my class. Is that when you read in the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah is unhappy about what's going on with Israelite worship or Judean worship. And he says in there, you say the Lord is with us because we have the law. This is Jeremiah's word. He says, but what you have is a lie from the pen of the scribes. Yikes. Now, why has that gone unremarked and unnoticed? That actually wound up being part of a dissertation I wrote. And it was called Jeremiah's Attack on Religion. And Jeremiah is saying, you have built this theology of the temple. You have built this theology of a Deuteronomy scroll. You have built all this stuff around here, and it's not authentic. Your religion is not authentic. Well, if you remember in the story of Jeremiah, the priests and the prophets will wind up turning against Jeremiah. But here's the thing, is that the prophets and the school of the prophets, or the guild of the prophets, they were actually part of the king's court. They would prophesy what the king wanted to hear. And here comes Jeremiah and says, no, these guys are liars. Well, there's one cool part where Jeremiah comes in and he's wearing this wooden yoke on him, and he goes, this is what's going to happen to you guys because Babylon is going to put you under the yoke. And so the chief prophet of the king hacks off this wooden yoke and says, there, we can take this yoke off. And then I saw Jeremiah goes out and he gets an iron yoke and he comes walking in and he goes, yep, this is what's going to happen. It ain't going to be wood. You're not going to break this off. Well, so the next best thing is to throw Jeremiah in jail. So who's the prophet? Jeremiah or these guys who are being employed by the king? Well, you know what Jeremiah's answer is going to be. So he's there prophesying before the time of the Josiah reform took full effect. And so that may have put him even during the reign of King Manasseh, who was just before. Others have said that this book is after the kings, it's after the fall of the south kingdom, which would put it after the year 586. That's when the kingdom of Judah fell to the Babylonians. Others who think that there is a historical Zephaniah, and I honestly, I don't know one way or the other. Both of them are absolutely possible. I tend to lean towards this being a real guy. And so this real guy, he may have been a disciple of Isaiah of Jerusalem. That is to say, has read Isaiah's text, because there's a lot of stuff in there that have real great similarities. Because both of them are really upset with the corruption and the injustice that's found in the kingdom of Judah. So, yeah, if Jeremiah was composed during the period of the monarchs, then we see that Judah's refusal to obey the covenantal obligations toward Yahweh, even though they'd seen what had happened to Israel just a couple of generations before, and the literary tradition of Judah was very well aware of Yahweh's anger against Israel and now against Judah. So Zephaniah is using all of that knowledge to say the same thing will happen to us. The same thing will happen to Judah. Just like what happened with the Assyrians conquering the north kingdom of Israel, so this could also happen to us. Were they looking at the Babylonians yet? Maybe. But there's still a little bit of time before the Babylonians, I should say, there's a little bit of time before Nebuchadnezzar gets there. When Nebuchadnezzar shows up, all bets are off. So we have an outline we see in chapter 1. There's the superscription, there's the coming judgment of Judah, there's the great day of the Lord. Okay, we know what Amos said about the great day of the Lord. You don't want it. He's going to pick up on that day of the Lord theme. There's a section of judgment against Israel's enemies. There's a section describing the wickedness of Jerusalem and all the court and the priesthood even involved there. Talks about the punishment against the foreign nations and also their conversion too. And then in the last chapter, there's this song of joy, which is remarkable. Some have thought this was a later edition, maybe, but it's astounding. So, with Zephaniah focusing on the day of the Lord, he develops this tradition that, like I said, first showed up with Amos. But the day of the Lord tradition also, we'll see it in Isaiah, we'll see it in Ezekiel, we'll see it in Obadiah and Joel, and even Malachi. This is a theme that will run throughout the prophets. He starts by describing the judgment that's coming. There's this threefold repetition of I will sweep away. That's frightening language. It's just like you won't even be remembered. I will sweep away. I will sweep away all of your idolatries. I will, yeah. And Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, it's talking about how total this destruction is going to be. Sweep away is a powerful word that's being used there. He talks about the things that are going to be swept away. And he gives a list of all the things, humans and animals, birds, the fish. Man, that ain't right. Wiping away the fish. And yet, all of them are going to be wiped away. Which is actually kind of the opposite order of creation that we see in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1 anyway, it starts with fish, and then has birds, and then has animals, and then has humans. It's, once again, the whole idea is undoing what God has done. God is saying, Zephaniah is saying that God is telling everybody, I will undo it in the same order that I did it, in reverse order. And then it's also signified by the way he uses the phrase, from the face of the earth. Again, powerful language. And that kind of forms an inclusion around Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Hearkening back to how the phrase is used in the Genesis flood. Remember? When God said, I will wipe away from the face of the earth. In fact, 3 times in Genesis 6, Genesis 7, and Genesis 8, just one verse in each one of those, the undoing of creation. But, like all the other prophets, Zephaniah thinks there will be a remnant who will be left. There won't be everybody destroyed. There will be those who come back, and he's right, actually. Which is what leads some to say this was written after the exile. This was attached to Zephaniah because they were witnessing a return back to Jerusalem, back to Judea. And so, okay, so this, Psalm of Joy is actually celebrating what they see happening right before them, right at that time. And then at the end of the book, there's the announcement of great hope, great joy, as Yahweh bursts forth in joyful divine celebration, it says, over his people. Yeah, nice stuff. All right, Habakkuk. Now, we're way too late for that, because I like Habakkuk a lot. There's only 3 chapters here. And the 3rd chapter, when I was in grad school, I had a class on the Psalms. And so one of the assignments was to do an analysis and an exegesis on any of the Psalms. And I was like, Habakkuk 3 is a Psalm? I'll do that, instead of picking one out of the book of 150 Psalms. So I went to Professor Harrelson and I said, I think I got my Psalm. He goes, yeah, which one are you going to do? I said, Habakkuk 3. Ooh, he says, I'm like, oh, all right, this is going to be hard. He's excited about it, which means I got to do a really good job on this. So, it made me fall in love with the book of Habakkuk. It starts off with the whole, Habakkuk complaining, how can you do something about these Assyrians? These Assyrians are just beating the daylights out of us. And God kind of responds like, yeah, okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Babel, or he calls them the Chaldeans. I'm going to use the Chaldeans, and you haven't known trouble until you've seen the Chaldeans. It's kind of like, the cure is worse than the disease. So, anyway, next week we will finish off with Habakkuk, and I want to take time with this one. So, So hang on to your papers for next week. Although I will still have some.
It's not next week, though, is it?
Oh, not next week, yeah. 2 weeks. Oh, and by the way, I think what we were talking about, I was talking with Tracy about our schedule. So on the 10th, we will meet. But the next one, of course, is the 24th, which is Thanksgiving. So we're going to meet at Linda's house for Thanksgiving dinner.
Why not? Bring a plate pass.
It's really good food.
So we will skip the 24th and then come back on December 8th. And then,
Oh, okay, so
Yep.
it'll be a month.
yeah, sadly.
Sure.
And then the 8th will probably be the only one we do for December because you got
There's stuff going on.
lots of stuff going on. So then probably come back around January, the second one would be the 12th. Yeah.
I think so.